Thank you for joining today in YouTube land and on Zoom land. We'll get started in about a couple of minutes. And I'm definitely excited for this last session as we wrap it up. It was really great breaking things down and kind of seeing the inside look to what managers are experiencing around AI and covering some of the research that is already developing behind all of what we discussed. So, with that said, I think we're pretty good to get started. So AI and management. So up to this point, we've talked about the mind shift. We've talked about strategy. We've talked about self-awareness as managers and what that means. And today we're going to just wrap it all up as to the strategy and the leadership component of what is going to be needed as we navigate these shifts, because there's definitely going to be shifts across industries, across role design, across engagement, as well as all of the challenges that we may not yet fully be aware of. And it requires some flexibility, some agility, in order to mitigate that as it comes, right? So with that said, I'll go ahead and get started. Today I need to wrap up a little early, and so for the time, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, hi everyone, I'm Dr. Myra Austin, just in case you've never met me, and I'll share a little bit about my company, Management Cues, who is hosting this webinar series. So, Management Cues is a management and leadership training company. We're unique in that we used neuroscience backed strategies, have had neuroengineers and neuroscientists test our approach. They actually followed our clients along for about a period of a year and we're able to identify incredible results with the methods and methodology that we use. And so we play really close attention to what people are experiencing while they're training. And so for us, it's important to understand the manager, not just speak to the manager or just facilitate, right? We're really kind of curious about how they experience management and leadership. So in today's agenda, the final session, we're going to break it down the same way we've been doing. We'll start with an overview, we'll break things down, and then we'll cover takeaways and resources that you can utilize right away. Okay, let's get into it. So, leadership is interesting because it requires influence, strategic insight, and all of these connecting points in the workforce environment. So, what is cognitive agility? So, cognitive agility is the leader's ability to shift patterns quickly, process competing inputs, and adapt decisions, right? And so, new technology definitely puts us in a space where we need to know what we're dealing with to be able to move this quickly, right? To have agility when it comes to leadership. Decision discipline is the ability to avoid reactive type of decision making, which is easier said than done because when we're talking about new technology, we're talking about shifts and changes taking place. And so for us to have discipline around how we respond, what kind of rigor we build, what kind of protocol we build, it's a mix of leadership and management. But from a leadership standpoint, we really have to build decision making discipline, right? And so those choices we're going to make is what's going to help us maintain speed and accountability. So, cognitive agility and the decision discipline. So, in AI environments, leaders are increasingly exposed to things that challenge these areas: rapid data updates, conflicting dashboards, or AI recommendations, which may not always be the best. And we have to be able to have discernment, reduced time between signal and required action. Everything is moving so much quicker. It takes discipline to know when to pause and pull back, right? Otherwise, we get stuck in that automation bias that we've been referencing across all sessions. So, core leadership behaviors. So, the core leadership behaviors now are going to revolve around pattern recognition over impulsive reaction, distinguishing when you see something meaningful versus just noise around AI outputs. Because again, AI just keeps going 24 hours a day with all of these outputs, pulling from all kinds of sets of data, good and bad. And so, our role within that as leaders is to slow down, not move faster, especially when stakes are high, and when we start to assess risk around these areas now. Reframing decisions as iterative rather than final is going to be something that we get comfortable with, right? Looking at things several times, really processing, in a space where it's easy to lose that critical thinking process and moment. So the cognitive flexibility strategy that leaders should look to implement and start thinking about, how are you going to introduce this to your leaders? How are you going to continue to build discipline around this to be effective, right? Decision filters. You have to think about things that are reversible and irreversible, because again, there's this kind of immediate gratification, fast paced automation taking place. You have to look at predefined escalation thresholds. What are the points of escalation when you're looking at using technology like AI? Structured reflection loops. That means you're going to have to intentionally incorporate how to reflect effectively to not lose critical thinking around decisions being influenced or being combined with AI. And risk mitigation and AI, that enterprise lens. So I always say to the managers that either report to me or that I develop or mentor or coach, that risk mitigation really requires an understanding of impact across the chain, right? And understanding how you impact that kind of domino effect across organizations. And so with AI, risk management is going to require different frameworks. And so if we're not thinking about how to design them, what the potential risk is, and we're just thinking about cost efficiency, time saving, and all this great, monetary, quantitative way of benefiting, we're really not looking at the whole picture. So risk management in AI-enabled organization shifts are going to create a shift from reactive problem solving to proactive risk architecture. So our focus is shifting, and we have to start laboring that so that we get good at it. We should be anticipating where decision systems or automation is going to fail before they actually fail. That's how you prepare people as a leader, right? It's vetting how AI lives in your environment. What does it really look like on the front end, on the back end? Do people understand its design? Do people really understand where jurisdiction lies legally for them if they're using AI? Have they used AI ever, right? Do they understand it? And I mean, really understand it, not just playing on their phones, right? There's more to it. What does it mean for them and the organization when they use it? So here are some key risk categories when it comes to AI-driven environments now. The operational risk, which is really talking about system errors, workflow disruptions. The data risk is inaccurate, biased information, or incomplete inputs, which there's a ton of research that shows AI does this. So the human has to know where to look and what they're looking for. Human risk and overdependence on AI, which is going to create and is already creating skill erosion. Ethical risk, which is fairness, transparency, and unintended consequences. And reputational risk, public trust, and stakeholder perception when AI goes wrong, which goes wrong very frequently if you look at the overall picture and the existing research. The legal risk is interesting because legislation is moving slow, and so we should be paying attention to what's already happening. So, non-compliance, data privacy laws, employee customer data usage are something that have been around for a minute, but now there's a component of AI. Right. So psychological risk, which is the stress that employees are feeling of this constantly being on. And AI has a component of monitoring and evaluation that a lot of employers are using, which is creating a physical response and psychological response in people. And so you're going to have to mitigate that unless, it ultimately becomes a legal thing and it's a hard stop, for whatever it is that you're using it for. The physical risk, there's also safety risks around AI supported physical environments and AI itself in general, and the impact it has physically on people's health in a lot of different ways. So let's break these down. Operational risk is systems failures, workflow disruptions. It's also incorrect automation outputs, process breakdowns between human and AI systems. Data risk is inaccurate or incomplete data inputs, biased data sets that are influencing decisions, which really means our leaders need to be able to detect, recognize, and call out bias. And I can tell you from my experience with both students and clients, we're not very good at it. And so we need to practice and we need to be able to do this because it will lead to greater problems. And so data security breaches or poor data governance. So we really have to understand what breaches around AI look like. What does governance around it look like? What's responsible, right? And where do we draw our boundaries? So the human risk, there's quite a bit of human risk. So just upfront, it's something we have to acknowledge. There's that over reliance on AI, right? So, if AI were to not exist, where would you be? There's skill degradation due to automation dependency, and I've shared this before. I've seen this in working groups, workshops with my students, with clients. I'm seeing it happen. And so reduced critical thinking and judgment capacity, which means we really have to think about how do we keep people effective where we need them to be, right? And I get the cost savings and the reduction of labor. It makes sense. It's financially, from a business standpoint, it makes financial sense, right? Ethical risk, so algorithmic bias impacting fairness, and keep in mind whoever is designing the type of AI that you're using, it's their systematic approach to things, it's their logic being coded, it's their experiences being embedded, and they're training data off of data that they're selecting for it to train on. So yes, it is already inherently biased, and we have to acknowledge that, right? So there's a lack of transparency in decision making when we're using AI, especially if you don't know how AI concluded or made a decision, right? If you're not clear on that, what data sets it's using. Misalignment between AI actions and organizational values, right? So you can't claim transparency and then have your people have no idea where jurisdiction is when you're using AI in your meetings in Zoom, right? Because that's, it's a real thing. And if something were to turn into a legal matter, they're going to be held to a jurisdiction they're not familiar with because they don't actually understand how AI is used in their environment, right? And that's just one example of many. So make sure that you're aligned in those areas and that your leaders and managers really understand what it means to use AI in the environment. So reputational risk. So public distrust in AI-driven decisions. Once people start having experiences and start to see the gaps and imperfections, it starts to erode trust, right, into how decisions are being made and whether they are actually being considered as individuals. Perception of unfair or opaque practices. Again, when you don't coach people through how it works, how you're going to use it, why you're using it in that particular decision, that's when you start to see this happen. And then social media amplification of failures. It's going to spread pretty quickly with everything that we've got going on in terms of social media and how easy it is, to run into an issue. Legal risk, so noncompliance of data privacy laws and liability for AI-driven decisions, failure to meet existing regulatory standards. And in one of our last sessions, we covered all of the states that are currently leading the charge on legislation around AI. And so as leaders, we need to know what that is, what that looks like, and how it impacts our operating environment and also our leadership strategies. Exposure to lawsuits due to biased or harmful outcomes, right? So these are things that are going to be top of mind and commonplace if we don't get into design mode. Psychological risk. So employees do experience stress from constant AI use. Anxiety related to job displacement or automation is a very real thing. I mean, we're talking about people's livelihood and stability being directly impacted. We're seeing it on the news. We could look up using AI who's had the largest layoffs and why, right? So reduced psychological safety is here for sure when decisions are being made and are considered to be AI justified without really providing an understanding around why the decision was being made. So that creates kind of an overload for us, a cognitive overload, because there's too many things taking place, there's too much information, and yet an absence of clarity. So this is all things that we are living with right now. Physical risk. So Equipment malfunctioning due to automated systems is a thing. I've actually spoken with engineers around this happening and them having to pull back AI driven and robotic systems because they still needed the human being and they were overly eager to remove them. And so that's us risk mitigating, understanding the limitations, not getting overly reactive, right? So harm caused by incorrect AI guided operational decisions is an example of what I'm saying, right? So insufficient human intervention in high risk physical tasks. And it's really not understanding kind of the technology all the way through. Right. So, core framework elements. So, here are things we have to think about if we're going to be strategic leaders, effective leaders, responsible and accountable leaders. Risk identification is thinking about what could go wrong across all categories, right? Not just what it could save us, not just how profitable we're going to be, not just how much time of labor we're going to reduce. It's looking at it all. Risk likelihood versus impact mapping. So, literally laying it all out, speaking to your teams, really understanding what they're experiencing. Control design, knowing where your controls are in place across process and how you're going to reduce risk or contain risk should it go wrong. Monitoring systems, how do you detect any early warning signals, right? How are you monitoring the tech itself versus the tech monitoring us, right? Or your teams? And what does that look like? Who's in charge of that? Right. And some of these things are gonna force us to reinvent roles, which could be a really positive thing. But we have to start looking at the design behind how we transact with AI in the environment. So the organizations of the future, what they're going to focus in on is multi-category AI risk registers, not just operational aspects of it, because AI is immersive. And there's a lot of different things that it can be applied to, a lot of different ways that it could be used. And then there's a group, an organizational, and an individual impact. So there's a lot here to look at. But you want to take a look at legal, HR, ops, and IT and have joint review boards because they have perspectives that are different from one another, all involving the technology that's living in one environment. So it's really interesting how these things are coming together. Scenario planning, and that has to include a psychological and physical harm case because AI is this transformative, right? And if we don't think it is, we're really naive around the technology itself. So human in the loop checkpoints, what does that look like for high impact or high risk decisions, right? When do you pull people in? Who gets pulled in? Why are you pulling them in? Right? You have to think about business in this way. So effective leaders design systems that protect not only performance, but also people, compliance, and trust. And you're going to need this with the shift that's incoming. So what research currently shows, so it's not just what I'm seeing physically that I'd like to share, right? Or my experiences in a space that I'm laboring, because all of these areas we're actually laboring because we see the gaps, we see the gray, and we see the lack of preparedness around it. So research, what is it showing us right now? And there's already research around some of this. So the adoption versus the value gap. So organizations are rapidly experimenting with AI. And again, we're excitable. It's amazing from a business perspective. It does X, Y, Z, but few achieve scaled, sustained impact so far. Many initiatives remain stuck in pilot or partial implementation stages. And I could tell you just from experience handling implementations and managing people that it's because of what we're not doing around the people component, right? It's because of that. So skills, capability, and cognitive gaps. There's a dominant barrier when it comes to a lack of internal capability and the appropriate level of training. And the training isn't just hard skill, it's also mindset around what it's shifting, how it's been designed, what is it for, right? All of these questions that we stress about. So employees often lack the skills to interpret, validate, or act on AI outputs in the right way. So organizational design and workflow integration gaps. So one of my favorite areas to labor as an operations leader is this space, right? So AI tools are often introduced without ever actually redesigning the workflows. You're just plugging AI in. And that is incredibly negligent to do, right? It's going to have issues along the way. So this creates inefficiencies, duplication, and resistance just by way of introduction. And again, there's a benefit, but there's also how you're introducing things. Governance, risk, and oversight gap. So most organizations right now lack formal AI governance structures. An example of it is employee handbooks. Do they have an AI clause of how to use it, of where to draw the boundaries, what the expectation is? Protocols is another one, right? What is the protocol around AI? Do you have trainings in place year round, already as to how to use it or who's responsible for what, or where does the liability lie when you're talking about AI, right? Those are just simple examples that really speak to whether we're governing at all around AI in business and in companies. Risk management is reactive rather than proactive, right? Well, so when something goes wrong, that's when people kind of rush towards it. But it also brings up the point, who's responsible for this, right? Is it IT? Is it operations? Is it HR? Right? So data quality and infrastructure gaps. There's poor data quality is something that's consistent, and it's a consistent cause of AI failure. And so, at least in higher education, we're looking at how do you detect whether you're being given the right information or not, and what are the steps that you take? Because otherwise, you're left at the mercy of data that sounds and has been structured in a very confident way. But that doesn't mean that it's correct, right? So legacy systems limit scalability in addition to that. Human resistance, trust, and behavioral gaps. So employees resist AI when it is unclear, untrusted, and very poorly integrated. Psychological and behavioral factors strongly influence whether they buy into it, whether they are using it correctly, whether they want to continue learning about it. And that's why this is so important to think about and design and be intentional in order to be successful. So another interesting part of this, and I've spoken with other experts and professionals in the AI space, the return on investment measurement and value realization around AI is inconsistent at best at this time. So not everybody gets necessarily a return on investment for what they're doing with AI. Organizations struggle to measure real business impact from it, and many benefits are overestimated when they're running their pilots. And so doing things at scale presents probably more challenges across the areas we've talked about, right? Because there's exceptions, there's the human factor, there's the industry, there's legal regulation, all of these things to consider. So, across scholarly and industry case studies, AI implementation failure is consistently driven by a misalignment between technology capability and organizational readiness. And so it's the organizational readiness that is the biggest concern for me because of just the conversations, what I'm seeing, what I'm measuring right now. So I think that it's a good question for you to gauge, based on some of the things we've talked about in this webinar series. So the gaps right now are these: structural, the meaning workflow and systems; cognitive, meaning decision making and skill set; behavioral, meaning trust and resistance; governance based, meaning risk and accountability; and data driven, meaning quality versus infrastructure. And I'm starting to really dive into the governance space. I'm actually going to be likely doing a speaking engagement in June around AI and compliance. So it's something that you really have to start learning and researching and reading and understanding to really be able to govern it at all. It is that different. So these are some sources I've collected for you on active research. You can link it. These are live links. You can search them, read them. I suggest that you do as leaders, so that you prepare your mindset around how to create agility for yourself and be able to navigate these things as they come in. So top 5 leadership mistakes when it comes to AI, things I'm both seeing and researching right now: treating AI as a technology upgrade instead of an organizational shift. AI is not just technology, right? I've said this before, it's the equivalent of electricity, of the internet, right? It's revolutionary. And so we have to step into it that way with with caution. And so delegating AI strategy only to IT or vendors, huge mistake. There's a lot more that it impacts across the enterprise or the organization. Ignoring human behavior like trust and psychological impact is another thing that's going to hit you in a very drastic way if you don't keep tabs on it. Under investing in manager capability and decision training, huge gap there right now. Most people are getting trained on how they can use AI in their environment, not how it works, not how it's been designed, how it's going to impact their decision making or their role, and what shifts they need to make mentally. Right? Those seem to be the gray areas that I'm seeing so far. Lack of clear AI governance and accountability structure. Who's responsible for what and when? And what does the law say so far? And so those are the top 5 things that I see people struggling with. So here's the big picture. In reality, AI increases the need for stronger leadership discipline, clearer decision rights, more intentional organizational design, and deeper understanding of human behavior. And I would say neuroscience plays a big role in some of this, and why we're responding to things the way that we are, and what the pattern is looking like so far. So here's a case study of IBM Watson for oncology, healthcare AI failure, right? And think of it from the position of a patient when we're going to these environments and getting service, right? Getting care. So what happened? IBM developed Watson for oncology, an AI system designed to recommend cancer treatment plans based on patient data and medical literature. It was heavily marketed as this breakthrough thing that was going to take care and automate and create great efficiency, right, around care in the hospital. Here's what happened in how the implementation failed. The recommendations were often inconsistent and were actually unsafe. There were probably recommendations a doctor would never make. In some cases, the system suggested incorrect or non-standard treatments, putting the patients at risk. It was trained heavily on synthetic data and hypothetical cases, not enough real patient outcomes. So again, because it's very likely these doctors themselves, the staff that was using them, wasn't trained on how this is designed, how AI pulls data and where it pulls it from, this wasn't mitigated. And this is going to happen over and over again when we don't train properly. Doctors reported that Watson sometimes made suggestions that conflicted with established oncology protocols, right? Keep in mind, AI never is good with context, ethics, good or bad, lived lens, experience. That doesn't exist in that technology, right? So ultimately, many healthcare organizations scaled back or discontinued use due to the reliability concerns. So here's why it failed. It failed because of the organizational behavior and AI lens that was being used. Data quality and training was a mismatch. Overtrust in technology, right? It looked great, it sounded great, it was marketed so heavily, people just trusted it immediately. Poor workflow integration. We didn't look for the bottlenecks. We didn't look for where it was pulling from, and what were the limitations we should have been looking at to begin with, right? Misalignment between technology and domain expertise. Keep in mind the people on the front lines aren't ever going to be AI experts. That is an unrealistic expectation. So it's up to us as leaders to make sure the right trickle down happens around knowledge, and that we have some tactical play around it to really understand it. Governance and accountability gaps, right? Who owns what, when, and why, right? So the outcome of this case study was that multiple hospitals deployments were reduced or discontinued. So think about the cost, the time, think about the damage and reputation. I know for me, I'm very careful with my care. I would not go back to a hospital that did something like this. Right. So IBM scaled back Watson Health ambitions. The case became a leading example of overpromised AI in healthcare without sufficient validation. And sometimes you're going to have to fine tune with the technology until you get it right for your environment. That is something that we need to know upfront and communicate upfront to people, right? And what does that process of reiteration look like as we're actively using it in real environments where there is real risk, right? So key takeaways for today. AI is only as good as the data it is trained on. So if you don't know what data it's trained on, how to filter it, how to look for accuracy, how to look for flaws, there start there, right? High stakes environments require human validation loops, no doubt about it. Automation bias can quietly override critical thinking. You have to actually mitigate that with a strategy. Poor workflow integration skills adoption, even when the technology is strong, is necessary. The design around these areas is necessary. Governance and accountability must be defined before it is deployed, right? So not when it hits the wall, right? You have to know what you're going to do and who is going to own it. Okay, so we're at the end of our series. So I'm going to go ahead and look at our YouTube channel for any questions, but it looks like we're okay. So some training and support resources for you. So for those of you that registered, you'll get the session recording, a copy of the webinar deck. You have links here to training programs we have available, to our amazing management planner that walks managers through the functions. Keep in mind too, getting people writing and doing workshops around writing is going to help some automation bias that's already in environments. So the use of the old school tools is actually going to be incredibly relevant in the near future. If you want to take a look at our neuroscience studies, you're able to access those through the link. And if you would like to speak with me, you can access our free consultation, and I'm happy to help you with that. So with that said, this is the end of the AI webinar series. Thank you so much for joining. Reach out any time with feedback, and I'll catch you on the next series. Take care.